Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to installment 4 of August Heat, Allies and Antagonists, a limited series that Darren Dietz has put together for San Diego Opera that I have been very, very happy to co-host with my much more intelligent counterpart and friend, Nick Ravelis. By way of formal introduction, one of the things that I was, and I still am very excited to discuss is when I introduce our guest baritone today, Mr. Daniel Sutton. Daniel has really had, up till this point, and shall continue, an incredible career as an opera singer. And he is somebody who, well, first of all, has sung all over the world. And he has sung more roles than I think any other baritone that I know personally. He has more roles in his repertoire. If you go to his website and just sort of pull out, he has a page which is his role list. And I'm just going to sort of give you a sense of the expansiveness of this artist's repertoire. He sings everything from German repertoire, Beethoven, Fidelio, the Ninth Symphony, the title role, from Alban Berg. He sings the journalist in Lulu. He sings the title role in Wozzeck. He sings many varied Wagner roles he has under his belt, from Lohengrin to the Meistersinger. One thing that he does all over the world is the role of Alberich in Das Rheingold, and Siegfried in Götterdämmerung. He sings Bitterolf in Tannhäuser, and he sings, I think, Kurneval in Tristan and Isolde, as well as the very complicated roles of Richard Strauss, in particular, Die Frau ohne Schatten. He sings The One-Eyed Brother. He sung or covered the role of Barak, which is one of the leading roles. So you would think, oh, wow, Daniel Sutton sings a lot of German repertoire, but his repertoire is not restricted just to the German language, as a lot of singers have a specialization in one language. Daniel sings an incredible amount of French repertoire, and the reason I've specifically asked him here today is to talk about all of the manifold number of verismo roles he has under his belt. From Pagliacci, he sings the role of Tonio in the Mascagni Cavalleria Rusticana. He sings the role of Alfio. And then as far as Puccini characters, he's covered everything from Marcello in La Bohème to Jack Rance and Sonora in La Fanciulla del West, and literally has sung at Covent Garden, Metropolitan Opera, Chicago Lyric, Washington National Opera. He's many times in Savonlinna, had a huge career singing in Germany as well. So I'm very excited to talk about a lot of different things, but formally, I want to please welcome my friend, my colleague, our guest today, Mr. Daniel Sutton. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a delight to be here and see you and speak about all that I do. Is very interesting. It's I was in Germany such a long time, and the German has sort of fell into my lap because I'm fluent. That was one of the reasons. The Wozzeck fell into my lap because we had done an astounding, 24 Wozzecks when I was in Germany. In fact, Andrew Davis, who I was always astounded, he once asked Stefan Finke, who was doing the Tambourmajor this last time, how many Wozzecks have you done? And he said, oh, when's the first time you did the Tambourmajor? And he said, oh, I did it. No, what's the first time you were in Wozzeck? And he said, oh, it was with Daniel in Mönchengladbach and Krefeld. And I've done an astounding 35 times Wozzeck. And then because of the German language, and it's sort of the German fell into my background. And then I also found that the Italian was so good for my voice. And starting with that at the beginning, and it really, in a way, the German has really helped the Italian in my voice. This is coming back to Scarpia. this German has really strengthened the muscles to singing the Italian. So it's very interesting that it's sort of inverted itself to where, oh, well, very often they think, well, maybe you're just a German singer. But I found that after these Alberi, the Scarpia felt much more secure any of the other Italian because of the amount of singing and the strength of the Albrecht and what you have to do with it and the muscles involved. So it's interesting. I had a comment. I had a job with Opera North that was unfortunately canceled because of the COVID-19. And he had said to me, well, I have to ask you, singing the German, does it hurt the Italian? And I had found that there's a strength in my voice after the German back into the Italian.
Very interesting.
Which is an interesting
So,
feeling.
so Daniel, let me ask you some specific questions
Sure.
about not only German language singing, but specifically the role of Wozzeck, because it's been something, as you've said, you acquired it in Germany, and you have lived with this role for, I would say, what, close to 2 decades now? Is that a fair
starting in 1997, 96, maybe 96, maybe close to 2 decades now that it's true that I've lived with this part.
So this role in particular is really considered to be one of the most difficult pieces of music in the operatic canon.
Which is true, which is very true.
So how, and I suspect at this point, I mean, I know that you've covered it at Chicago Lyric. I know that you have many times covered it at the Metropolitan Opera, and you had a great success, I believe, in 2014. When you went on
unexpectedly, I went on,
and you stepped into the role and you took over the role, and you had a great success.
Yes, but it's also the point about the idea, and I learned this also from Juilliard. I was in Juilliard, and I had bachelor's and master's of voice in Juilliard. And I had she's now passed away, Mary Anthony Cox was a very famous, she had worked with Nathalie Boulanger in France, and she was a very famous teacher. And she always was, I remember telling us, you never think of Wozzeck is not essentially an atonal piece. It's still within the tonal world. But she always said that, if you think of Wozzeck as a Marcello or as in the tonal world, you have a much easier time in learning it. And when I first learned it, I had that always in mind, that it was never a role that would be out of the complete tone world that we know, say, of Luna or Marcello or any of the other roles, or Tonio, where it's much more what you say bel canto-ish and with the lines. But for me, it was always the whole idea that I could always, by using the method of learning these other roles, sort of hook into Wozzeck that way, into the learning it with the intervals. And I learned it really note for note is sort of how I learned it. In order to really know it, one had to know where the intervals were. So that's sort of an idea of, if it gives you an idea, that this part also is very, very based on the story. It's very easy to identify his predicament of his life, what he had to go through, and it sort of has hooked into my, how should I say, into my skin. It's sort of something that I've always, as strange as it sounds, I always can pull it out now. Even now, if I have to sing it, it's always sort of in me, simply because of the whole number of times that I associated actually also the bel canto aspect of the Wozzeck. To me, it was never away from the idea that you can wanting to sing it beautifully. And this is another aspect of say Luna or Scarpia, or the idea that you want, or Germont, that you want to sing it beautifully. And I think once I think like that, even Albrecht, Albrecht to be sung beautifully, the whole idea is that you're not punching the voice, that you want to sing the voice beautifully. If you take that aspect of Albrecht as a totally awful character that he is, it takes on another meaning, that you're not just barking away, but you're actually also, with Wozzeck too, you're singing in the beautiful moments that that Wozzeck has, with his monologues. And I mean, I found in auditions actually one complete sort of audition aria part that one can use, and it's really like a really sort of, even though it's an atonal aria, it's sort of really a complete aria. I mean, that you can use. And go ahead.
Well, I think you're in great company, and you're strategizing for singing very complicated, somewhat angular music in the German language is really extremely well supported by the type of approach that I know that you take in bel canto and Italian repertoire. Because when I first met with you and had the pleasure of collaborating with you, it was in a world of music that was completely different from the Germanic repertoire. And that was, when I first met you, was in Palm Beach working on a production of Otello, where you performed the role of Iago.
Right.
And it was, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you, when I first encountered Daniel in the musical rehearsal for Iago at Palm Beach Opera, when he sang the Credo, he terrified everybody in the room. And not only because of the veracity of his interpretation, but because he had a full command of the character from the very beginning, which is something that is very impressive. And I want to talk about, but I think for the people who are attending today, our San Diego Opera patrons who may not necessarily know your singing intimately, what I'd actually like to do, with your permission, and stand by on that button, Joey, is to actually let everybody hear an excerpt of you singing some Italian repertoire. And this is actually a YouTube clip that Daniel has graciously allowed us to play for you. And this is from Act 1 of Tosca. The character, of course, is Scarpia, and this is the very famous Te Deum. So without further ado, we're all going to listen. Now, this is not actually, it's a live recording, but it isn't actually video that is accompanying. So there's going to be some vignettes and some beautiful pictures of still photos of Daniel in the production, and I think some headshots as well. But the point here, ladies and gentlemen, is to listen very specifically for this fantastic bel canto legato that Daniel incorporates into a piece that we all know and love. So without further ado, Daniel Sutton singing the role of Scarpia, Act 1, Te Deum from Tosca. Well, Daniel, I think we all share in the applause at in that live performance, and you can hear the beautiful, seamless bel canto quality that you adopt in music that can very often be much less legato at the end of this act, which is a very passionate moment. And I think you manage it beautifully. So complimenti to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So here's something that I'm very interested to get your feedback on. I once asked a young baritone, and by young, I'm talking about somebody who was in his very early 30s, maybe 32, 33, who was singing professionally and doing a lot of Marcello from La Boheme, singing a lot of Cenerentola, Dandini, singing a lot of Not Figaro, the title character in Barbiere di Siviglia, singing Figaro in Barbiere di Siviglia, and also singing a lot of Mozartian roles. And I asked him for the purposes of a concert if he would be willing to sing the Te Deum. And his answer is, oh, I couldn't possibly even consider singing something like that for at least 10 more years. I'm far too young for this.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'd like to sort of get your sense of, in terms of a broader vision, there are sort of progressions and landmarks along the way to singing the mature Verdi and Puccini roles that obviously where you are in your career, these things I suspect fit you like a glove. And when I think about your voice in particular, aside from all of the great Germanic repertoire, I think of you in very much as a Verdi baritone.
Yeah.
So is there in a perfect world, is there a progression of repertoire that a young baritone wants to start off with in order to move into the big, heavy Verdi baritone repertoire and be able to manage it with longevity in their career?
Well, I liked what he was doing. The repertoire that he was doing, I thought was very good. You know, what he started out to do, I thought that he's on the right path. The question is how would he feel if he were to learn the role and sing it through? How would his throat feel? How would the muscles feel? Would this potentially be something that he would feel that he's going over his border, or the, you know, as you say in German, the Grenze of it, but really the border? It's a question of the idea of how do you feel when you if it's too low, how will it cause the voice to shake? Will it cause the voice to have early problems in that the muscles are not quite ready, that the maturity of the instrument. These are the questions that I feel that one has to ask themselves. How does one feel if he was going to, in my feeling now, if you were to learn the whole role and see how you would feel singing the role, and is it something that you feel that you can, like an audition aria, is it something he feels that he could do easily? There's a feeling to me, the idea of that, are you able to sing things for auditions that are your best? Could he get up at 4 in the morning and sing this aria, this role? I've always had that test very often. I'll get up at 4 in the morning and sing through the role. I mean, softly, or even the whole idea of could he sing through the role? And to me, that's one of the ways of knowing if he, to me, a Scarpia could always be older. And to me, the baritone voice in some of these roles could get going at 43 or 40, 44. But to me, in my case, I found the older my voice gets, the stronger and more healthier I also feel. It's also part of my story of my voice teacher, Armin Boyajian, who I've worked with many, many years, who is perhaps one of the greatest teachers in opera today, has always spoke about, you know, these singing the lyric roles at the beginning, later on have had me the idea then that I could do the Albrecht, that I could do the Scarpias. And it's interesting for me now, I almost feel like now I'm just in the right place for these roles. And I think that, like with wine, I think the voice will age in the right way. But my test has always been, do you feel that you get the most optimum sound with your voice, and does the role lie in the, obviously, some of the roles, for example, like Hollander, for example, that are sort of bass baritone.
This is the Fliegende Hollander of Richard Wagner, his first real German opera, full length.
And I think it really is the idea is that how, and a good teacher will tell you this too, how it lies in your voice, how you feel when you sing it. Obviously, a Figaro is a lot different than some of these heavier roles. You have to have it more in the top of the voice. And for me, that it was always the idea is, could I sing this role easily? How do I feel with the muscles? Will I? It's to me, it's always the whole idea of testing the role and seeing how you feel about it. You know.
So you're talking very, very specifically about a couple of technical things that I think our audience would be very interested in understanding in a little more detail. And that is when you talk about the range of a role, it's not just a matter of, can I sing the highest note in the role?
Yeah.
And can I sing the lowest note in the role? But one of the things that we talk about is where the meat of the role lies, and specifically we use the word the tessitura of the role, where the sweet spot of the role is, and it usually is a much smaller intervallic range than the extreme high and the extreme low of the role. And so what I hear and what I understand you're referring to in terms of testing the role is, what is the tessitura of the role, and how can you manage that and to sing in that vocal space for, you know, for a 2.5-hour opera in the case of a Tosca or a Puccini opera. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, exactly. I feel it's so important that I feel for the baritone and the basses. For me, the older one becomes, the better the voice becomes, the stronger it becomes, and the more you find out what is right for your voice, what is the tessitura, what can I do to keep my voice fresh, what will I do that won't damage the voice, what roles that are, for example, singing Wotan, for example, when you're more of a higher baritone. Some of these things, I'm not sure what roles can keep my voice fresh. If you hear the old singers, even Merrill, even the old baritones, or some of the other people,
Robert
even
Merrill.
I'll give a very good example of a very famous baritone, Matera Monteguerra, and he was a very famous Verdi baritone. I had a recording of him. There's one on YouTube of him 65. He still had the freshness of the voice. And for me, I think that the nature, you can never trick nature. You can never fool it. If you don't watch your voice, it could eventually catch up with you. The idea of you creating wobbles in your voice, you creating vocal injuries that normally would not be there if you were going to say, well, okay, this is the roles that I do. If I'm a Figaro, I'm a Figaro. If I am this role, of course, nowadays with the idea of the farce and all that, many people interpret you. Basically, people have an idea of what your voice betrays, but the real fact is making sure that it's the right roles that you can sing. And if you happen to be a light baritone, I'll give a very good example of a wonderful baritone, Peter Mate, who I covered as Wozzeck. He is a lighter baritone, but it's a wonderful voice, and he's a wonderful artist. And the whole idea is that if you portray what you are, you're most likely to be able to sing in a long, long time. That's what I feel.
So it sounds to me like it's not just a combination of having an exquisite physical skill set combined with exceptional musicianship in order to sing very complicated roles like the Germanic repertoire, or being able to spin out a beautiful bel canto line. But it sounds to me like you're talking about the notion that there's a physical aspect to the singing which has to do with the match of the body as an instrument. And you made the reference to, of course, a fine wine and a younger baritone who might be singing higher, lighter repertoire, a la, Figaro Barbieri di Siviglia, where you have a lot of fast-moving notes, and it sits in what we call that higher tessitura a lot of the time. As one matures in one's body, physically, you gain, weight in a good way. And your physical cavities in your head, and all the resonators we talk about technically during a coaching situation, all of these things mature over the course of, and particularly for the baritone, the mature baritone voice, over a 10 to 15 year period.
Yes.
So it's a combination of not only being highly attuned to the repertoire that fits you in any given moment, but also creating a long-term strategy as to, I can sing this lighter repertoire and start to move into heavier repertoire in a very strategic way over the course of 10 to 15 years. So the repertoire that you're actually singing at the beginning of your career could and most likely should be very, very different towards the end of your career in a voice type like yours.
Yeah, certainly, because in response to this baritone, I would say he has time. I think that even the idea of him thinking this way, I think is a very healthy way, because later on, in my feeling, Scarpa is a heavy role, Gerard is a heavy role, the Albert is heavy, or even the Iago. These are heavier roles that demand the maturity of, as you said, the maturity of the body, and most often the maturity of the vocal cords, the vocal apparatus. I think I've always was told by my teacher the idea of, at the beginning I had the difference between Onegin and Rigoletto, and he had told me, I really want you to do Onegin. And I believe the adherence of and even the adherence of the lyrical roles will drive you all the way through your voice, and keeping your voice forward, of course, and will drive your career in a very long place, because then you're up to where you've portrayed yourself. And that my other feeling is that it'll bring you to where actually your voice will go ultimately later on in your, studies. If you're destined to do, a Scarpia, the voice will be able to, in my feeling, respond to to those vocal demands. That's
very interesting. Very interesting. So then, for example, if we look now specifically starting to zero in on the music of the Verismo, and we
yeah,
take Puccini sort of as the template, as
yeah,
he came into the Verismo game
sure,
a little later, and some of these traditions and the way of approaching subject matter was already established by people like
mm-hmm.
Mascagni,
Yeah,
Leoncavallo, and you had the great tradition of Verdi that he was stepping out of. If you look at an opera like Bohème, which is an opera that deals with the life and loves of literally four
yeah,
young bohemians. In many ways, then what I'm kind of hearing from you is that you take a role like even the secondary baritone role, Chenard in La
yeah,
Bohème. He gets a little aria in Act One. He's got some interjections in Act Two. He doesn't appear in Act Three at all, and then he
yeah,
comes in for a little bit in Act Four, and in very much a supporting role. And if you sing Chenard well, then the next step in the graduation of acquiring roles, and
yeah,
as something
sure,
you said very interestingly to me, is the ability, the physicality to sustain over the course of a longer period of time. Then you to the role of Marcello,
yeah,
where
exactly,
you take on a
yeah,
much prolonged involvement, and you're singing for a longer period of time,
true,
that stamina. And I wonder whether, even in Puccini's canon, whether there's a progression for the type of baritone who will sing this repertoire. Because if we think about Bohème, Chenard, Marcello, move into pieces like Butterfly, where you have sharpless. Well, a
yeah,
Marcello can easily graduate into the role of sharpless, which is
yes,
something that
certainly,
you've
certainly, I've
you've
done,
had in your repertoire for many,
but I've
many
done quite a
years.
lot, yeah, yeah,
And then move into the heavier, or even Ping at that point,
yes,
which is
sure,
one of the three chancellors from
yeah,
Turin. And then it seems to me that once you've established that type of physicality in your
mm-hmm.
singing and your ability to maintain a much longer arc as a performer, then you move into the Scarpia, then you
Yes,
move into the Jack Rants
yeah,
of La Fanciulla del West. Is that sort of like a logical strategy for the baritone progression?
I think there's a big mistake made that people move too fast into the heavy roles without doing the Chonard, without doing the Marcello, without having this, you speak of the old days. Even my own training, I did with my teacher maybe 6, 7 years of vocalises before I even did arias with working with him. We were always doing the technical. When you speak, even Leonucci speaks about him doing that with his teacher, and the whole idea of it's a logical projection of the lyrical roles into the heavier roles, and the whole idea of learning about where your voice really can go, where your voice really sounds right, without the idea that you somehow, without, if not waiting, that you haven't damaged it by not waiting to do the heavier roles later on down the line, because that very often happens with singers, that they'll do things that will hurt their voice early on. And this is also a problem of portraying yourself to what you're not, and this is a danger. But this is exactly correct. I feel that with Chonard, it's number one, a fantastic acting part, which can never be underestimated, the idea of the acting, and it's even in some ways more challenging than the Marcello in terms of the acting and the stagecraft. But I do believe that even with Silvio to Tonio, it was a natural progression that someone did Silvio and went to Tonio.
This is
And
Leoncavallo Pagliacci.
Leoncavallo Pagliacci, excuse me, saying all these things without saying the titles, but
No, it's totally fine.
but I think it's very true. There is a progression of the Onegin to the Rigoletto to Forza, to Luna, to the whereas Luna, I must say, Luna and Posa, Luna in Trovatore, I'm sorry, Conte de Luna in Trovatore by Verdi, and the Posa in Don Carlo, two Verdi roles. They too have kept to the lyrical side of the voice, where they've been a good vehicle for me, even in my earlier years, to sing, particularly the Luna. But these roles too, I feel that once one really graduates to them, you really find the true beauty of them. And the acting, but I do feel that is very true, what you said about the progression of the vocal life of the singer. And yeah.
Good. So now that we're here and we've talked about how one acquires the appropriate weight of the voice and the ability in one's vocal prime, and sort of midlife maturity to be able to execute these roles, you mentioned something about the acting quality required for something like Schonar, because you have to like heat it up immediately. You come on and throwing coins all over the place in Act 1. It's a very physical 6 minutes of nonstop singing, and you have to do all of these bits. In some of these more extended roles, and I'm going to ask you to sort of look into roles like Tonio from Pagliacci, roles like Alfio in Cavalleria Rusticana, and roles like Scarpia, which are pieces of singing for the baritone. How and what are your considerations when you're being asked as a singing actor
to perform
to execute all of these various physicalities on stage? For example, typically in Pagliacci, Tonio is required to have some sort of physical
disability,
right? Either a limp or something like that. Scarpia is talk to me about that.
Well, I had very interesting discussion with Lea Crocetto, my Tosca, the one day when we were rehearsing, and there's a thing that she says that she always remembers, and it sounds quite simple, but she says you have to remember it's easier said than done, but what would you do in this situation? What would you do if you were Scarpia? How would you react? Certainly, how would you react if in the first act you come on and you have to speak to your men? Of course, he's a Gestapo figure, terrible, bloodthirsty, a killer, a policeman, a head of police, and he decides really about life and death. And it's very simple, simplistic, but in these roles, how would you, how would one personalize it? And what are the personal traits that you find within yourself that would make you do these roles? I mean, how do you feel jealous? How do you feel angry? How do you feel the love? And I think it's important to find out in the roles, how would you feel if you were cold? How would you feel being this poor? This sense of, for example, this is a very funny example, but we have now this situation of the COVID. There's a lot of uncertainty. To me, in some ways, in acting ability, when you're able to use certain experiences that you have of uncertainty, I think that is to your best ability, because it betrays the genuine you. This is what I'm trying to say. These acting, that's something that you can personalize in yourself. What does Schonar, of course, has to do a lot of managing between all of them, and he's also the hopeful one, and he's he's maybe more mentally stable than some of the others in the opera, or what would make Scarpia not be a stick figure, someone that would be sort of a cartoon character? How was one establishing Scarpia as not a cartoon? And my whole idea is the whole idea that someone had said to me that they felt in a way Scarpia was in love with Tosca in a way, that he has this incredible patience with her, and that he's able to be with her, and that he doesn't feel that he doesn't really feel so angry about her to her when she's not giving him what she's not giving what he wants. And I feel that this idea about what would you do, how do you want to trust your instincts to bring out, it's a very simplistic method, but we were talking about in Lei Cotretto de Tosca in the summer, how, what she feels about what would you do? How would you talk to somebody if you wanted to get something out of them? Or how would you, obviously, Scarpia has to be charmant, he has to be charming, he has to be a snake, he has to be where he appears to almost be likable, that he appears to be almost a nice person. It's a very, very important thing with these police commissioners. They, even in shows that you see, how some of the shows they say, okay, would you like me to bring you a cup of coffee? I mean, they almost seem like a way how to make you slip, how to, if that sort of is a inside working of what I think about Scarpia, what are some of the ways that make him human?
A veneer of affability, if you will.
Yeah.
So for our guests at San Diego Opera who were slightly coming in after the hour, and actually even with me, I know that you had enjoyed a few brief moments talking with Darren about your experience in the summer. And just to bring everybody up to date, one of the things that Daniel has been able to do in recent months that none of us have been able to do is perform live at an outdoor festival in Minnesota in July of 2020. The Northern Lights Music Festival gave, what was it, 2 performances or 3?
2 performances of
Tosca.
Of a complete performance, yeah.
The soprano that Daniel is referring to is the very well-known soprano Lia Corcetto, and you were also in very good company with my good friend and colleague tenor Rafael Davila, as well as the director Chia Patino.
Yes.
And I would like to know from you, Daniel, what types of discussions and what types of precautions did the stage director, Chia Patino, discuss with the entire cast, and then specifically apply to these relationships with Scarpia in his interactions with Tosca in Acts 1 and 2?
Well, she spoke about also to remember, like very in the beginning, we always had our masks on, first of all. And then only when we were going to maybe sing the dress rehearsal or some of the orchestra, then we would take it off. We mostly would have the mask on, which I found was easier for me because then I didn't have to keep going on and off with it. And we had temperatures checked, which is very important. And she spoke to me basically that even at the beginning part, when Scarpia in the beginning of Act 1, he comes on to see and sees her, she had me, in fact, sitting there in one of the pews as Scarpia next to her, and she tried to feel that Scarpia would sort of knock her off center in his personality, that he was more like someone coming to the church to pray, and that it was only until I'm very polite to her, it's only until the second act does he really sort of show, what he is. But she had us doing a lot of where I would be very gentle and kind to her and friendly to her, and there wasn't any thought of the idea that there weren't any sexual or indications. That it was sort of more of a conversation and I thought it was very interesting to the Scarpia, was that he had his desk and he would sit there and they'd come over to him, but he didn't have the idea that he had to. It was in a way that we could do a lot of indications of a lot of the things of being very close to each other. We were able to do it in a distance, which is uh, what I found interesting is that she shoots me in the end of the opera, which
Instead of stabbing.
instead of stabbing me as Scarpia, which I found quite good, and that it was quite interesting that also in the third act, this of Cavaradossi, when he's sentenced to be this fake execution, they have him digging his own grave. So she therefore was very interesting. She eliminated a lot of the pitfalls of maybe having it seem like we couldn't that we couldn't do the Tosca because it wasn't more of what the libretto said. And I thought it was very good what she did, because I was telling Darren at one point, the reviewer said he didn't miss the distance in Act 2 between the Tosca and the Scarpia. So I was literally thrilled with the idea that one didn't miss a lot of the traditional stagings. So that is just some of the things that it kind of worked. It worked quite well with this idea of being distant in this point, that we were able to. He was more of a Scarpia at the beginning, a kindly figure, than sort of a lecherous, chief of police, an assassin, or if that.
Sure, and well, even in the score, he comes out with I think his opening line is "Tosca divina la mano mia," right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, very good. So it sounds to me again like in this sort of new world of presenting opera, what I'm hearing from you is you didn't necessarily feel that your art and your craft, in particular your stage craft, was necessarily compromised by the distancing and having a creative stage director be able to still tell the story.
True. No, I felt that I could still sing and tell the story. We just had distancing to the point where we could keep ourselves safe. But I felt that I was back like I had been before in earlier times.
Were there challenges associated with working with an orchestra which wasn't necessarily in a pit situation where you can hear them the way you're accustomed to, either at an indoor theater or at a good outdoor festival where you can still have everybody in close quarters? Did that affect you at all?
Well, sometimes I felt maybe one could hear it a little bit more, but in general, it was a very good. It was a sort of an outdoor, about 1,600 seats. They had about, I think, 250. I found that the acoustic was quite good. I heard quite well what was being done, and the conductor I really also enjoyed very much. He was terrific in keeping everything together. What they did, which I thought was very good, is they taped they taped most of the chorus, and then they came out in masks, which I thought was a very good idea. It was hard to sometimes put it all together, because when you tape things, it doesn't always gel, the way you imagine it. But I thought that we basically we were able to hold most of it together, which I was very happy about, because you always have the idea of that, well, will the orchestra be able to hear us, because they were sort of rather down lower than us, and they had some screens there for the woodwinds and all that. But honestly, with the theaters, of course, also in San Diego, I'm sure, with the acoustics, I was able to hear pretty well. I was quite pleased that we were able to do a lot of essentially the story without having to feel like, oh well, okay, I can't get near the Tosca, or I can't get near my men.
I for one feel reassured by hearing you talk about presenting opera in the new world, and knowing that aside from one of the things that we've discussed in our month-long presentation,
Yeah.
is this notion. We had a guest director, Katura Stikhan, was here 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the plans and the provisions for COVID-19 type of performances.
Yeah.
And obviously the concern of safety is very, very high. And what you talked about and alluded to with temperature checks and singing with masks on initially, and the distancing doesn't seem to, in the hands of people who know what they're doing, who are creative and who are finding solutions, that actually the product in the end, while it might not be what everybody's always expecting, something that is going to be exciting and very enticing to go and attend.
Yeah, I feel it'll be in the right hands and the right orchestra and the right singers, of course. I think you get quite close. We got 95% close to, it was a lot. We got close to really having a exciting, I always remember, it's funny that I think this statement, but what Shakespeare said, all you need is a passion and a board. I mean, when you think of these times now, I was reminded now of Shakespeare, who said that. Think of it, and it sort of interesting popped into my head. And to me, we got very close with the story, and that was I know that I remembered at times to turn my face away, to wear a mask when I'm walking out, to sometimes I would sing with the whole mask in rehearsals. These things we remembered, but we got very close. We got a lot of exciting moments,
that's really great to hear, Daniel. And I think, one of the new mantras in producing opera at this point has to be execution is the new excellence. In the fact that if you're able to actually put together production, execute it, so that people can have that live experience, that's going to be a new standard of excellence that we're all working towards. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we start to wind up, there's a couple of things that I want to do before I get into my thanks, and that is, of course, open up the chat. If anybody has any questions they would like to ask of myself or my very special guest, Daniel Sutton, you actually have a rarefied moment where you have the opportunity to ask questions of a Verdi baritone who has sung literally all over the world in so many different styles and periods of repertoire, that this is the time. If you have any questions you want to ask either of us, I'm going to open up the chat so that make that available. And while we're waiting for any questions to come in, one thing I want to ask you, Daniel, because you have a huge repertoire, what is it that is on your list that you have yet to perform, a role that you have yet to acquire that still you...
Oh boy, that's exciting. Well, I'd like to do Gerard in Chenier, Carlos Gerard in Andrea Chenier.
Okay.
I've seen that. I never did Ballo Mascara, the Renato in Ballo Mascara. What else did I in the German, the Amfortis, the ones in Parsifal, the Wagner, also the Posa and Don Carlo. Those are, and maybe Don Carlo de Vargas in Forza del Destino in Verdi. These are some of my wish roles. I've looked at also well, this is more in the German, the Beckmesser I've looked at the...
this is from Der Meistersinger.
Der Meistersinger from Nuremberg, the Wagner.
Yes.
But what else of my dream roles that I've sung? That's some of them that I have that I've... Forza has always been one that I've always loved. I think I have at home, my wife I think we have 6 or 7 Forzas recordings. When Forza comes on, I stop everything. Forza has been always my secret passionate opera.
Fantastic. It's a good list. Daniel, I'm going to interject. We've got a couple of questions. Sure. I'm going to go in reverse with the audience's permission from Nancy Howard. Does tessitura progression apply to tenors who either move to a baritone later in life? So I think the question is, does that become a consideration if you've sung, if correct me if I'm mistaking,
If you sung as a tenor,
if you're a tenor and you switch to baritone, is that the question?
Yeah, it's a very difficult and very dangerous and very hard question, because if you realize this, however, in some history of singers who have done it, majority of them could never go back. So this is my question: is one has to decide first of all, with a great teacher. Number two, do you feel that your voice in the time that you have to change to that, will you be able to sustain that tessitura again, the meat of the voice? Do you feel that in all honesty, if you were to train and then try these roles, do you think that your voice would not give out? Can your voice stay in these roles? And my personal opinion is, I don't know, Bergonzi was quite, wasn't he, we're talking, right? He was successful, right, in doing that, right? Well,
this is tenor Carlo Bergonzi. Yeah, absolutely. I like to think he was.
He was, you mean baritone to tenor, right? Is what we're saying again, right?
Well, that's the other way, yeah.
You mean going from tenor back to baritone, right?
Correct. I think that's the one that Nancy was
trying to say. Tenor back to baritone. I suppose my feeling is one shouldn't attempt that, but it all is a question also of your vocal instruction, whether or not, and the teacher who you have. If you had a teacher such as mine who had said, okay, you could do that, I would say yes. But in my deepest feelings, it's dangerous. It's perhaps ill-fated if your voice is wanting to stay where it was naturally born. So it's a hard question, but I suppose it could be done, but sometimes people have come to grief because when they landed into baritone, the voice wasn't quite right. And then the idea is you couldn't really go back.
Okay, well then I'm going to jump in because we have two more questions, Daniel. I think we have time for two. From Williams, how did you know that you, Daniel Sutton, had an excellent singing voice to begin with? That's part one. Mm-hmm. Part two is, and how did you know it was suitable for opera as opposed to singing in a popular music style?
Well, this is an interesting question. I had a bar mitzvah, and my cantor was sick, and I had to sing the whole service. And I discovered that I had a voice after that. He was in the hospital, and it was inadvertently. The other thing is I always really had the voice, even as a youngster. I always had, it's something I was born from God, really, I would say, when you have a voice. And there was another question you said, was the
Well, and how did you know that it was suitable for opera versus pop?
I kind of inadvertently fell in love with opera. My mother played the opera in the house all the time, the Texaco broadcasts. Sure. And I remember me telling her, can you shut off the screaming? It's giving me a headache. But then inadvertently, I sort of fell in love with it. It's also opera is very seductive. Opera is something that grabs you. It pulls you in. It's sort of like a great meal, a great love, it's sort of a drug also in a way. To me, I never can get enough of it. Even now, I'm rather excited when I hear Franco Corelli. I'm rather excited when I hear the great Pavarotti. I hear the great tenors of the great performances, or Montserrat Caballé, or any of the great singers. Or anybody who I've heard lately say there's another great tenor, Lemmy Pullman. I don't know if you've heard his voice.
Sure.
Heard Bruce's voice. It's exciting to me after all these years, but it's the nature that it's a very seductive. I could even go to saying opera's a very erotic art because it can seduce you, but in the right way, and it's a drug in the right way. So if I
all of all of which are myriad of reasons that we always assemble for not only for these Zoom broadcasts, but in the Civic Theater and elsewhere to experience the excitement of opera.
Sure.
I think Carl C., who's asked the question, I think we've sort of addressed it, but to get a confirmation, can you or do you want to do the reverse and go back to singing the lighter roles after achieving the heavy roles?
Well, it's an interesting question because I always imagined what would Don Giovanni have done with me, or what would have maybe some of that role, or what would have been even some of the lighter roles that I don't know. I maybe having a little bit of, as we're saying, I don't know what it is in English, Sehnsucht, a little bit of the
Longing.
The longing
Yes.
of say the Don Giovanni, or the Wolfram in the Tannhäuser in the Wagner.
Tannhäuser, sure.
It's a thought that something has occurred to me. What would have been to have done some of these, to have done that role in even some of the other lyrical roles? It's always been sort of my, or I did a lot of Onegin in German. I always had the feeling, what would have been in it as Russian, the Onegin? And I do sometimes have those feelings of longing of what would some of these roles, if that in a way answers the question.
Sure, very much so, and well said. To me, it's if we talked about the progression of a meal, and we've gone through to the entree, and we're now pairing a barolo with a good piece of meat. It's hard to go back to a Sauvignon Blanc.
Right.
Because your palate's kind of blown out in a little bit of a way, but that's for another day. Listen, according to Darren, I want to let everybody know that we're going to be picking up a new series each Wednesday at 3 p.m. starting in September. There's going to be some more information to come along that route. Also, of course, I would be remiss to say that if you would like to make a small donation, please try to donate the Donate To app, which is listed earlier in the chat. Before I thank our very special guest, I want to make sure that I dutifully and gratefully thank our technical support guru, Joseph Witzel, who has always got his finger on the button to have audio and video ready at the tip of the press of a finger, and to make these Zoom sessions as successful as they are. I want to thank my friend and colleague Darren Dietz for masterminding all of these Zoom casts and creating so much content for our San Diego Opera patrons, viewers, our friends, and of course, I wouldn't have a show today if it wasn't with the kindness and the good grace of my very good friend, the wonderful artist, the Verdi baritone extraordinaire, Mr. Daniel Sutton. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight, and thank you, Darren, very much for all your help. And I've had a wonderful time, and thank you so much. And it's great to see you again, and have missed seeing you for a while, and I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much.
I'm glad, Daniel. So good to see you.
And thank you,
everybody out there in Zoom, all my San Diego Opera colleagues, friends, and patrons.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for attending this series. We'll be picking up again in September. I wish you a great Monday. I know there is an aperitivo with artists tomorrow, and a lot more content that's gone up on YouTube, Opera en tu Sofa, with Andrea Puente Catan. Some great stuff from the San Diego Opera. Keep us in your minds and in your hearts. And until next time, ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruce.